So, okay, we've looked at the foramen of the valley. Let's now look inside the heart. And we've got several of these and several specimens over there where we'll cut these guys open. So there's a couple things that you want to look at. You want to be able to distinguish when you're looking at the heart muscle. This is essentially a median section. And essentially you want to be able to distinguish the two chambers. How do you know left from right? Well, the easiest way, I mean, you said, well, it should be obvious. Well, and it is. If you look at the outer wall, the left ventricle is going to have a very thick outer wall. It's a high pressure system, okay? If you look at the right outer wall, or the other outer wall, it's really thin. So that's going to be the right ventricle. That's a low pressure system. Okay? And as I've indicated here, in this specimen where it's intact, but basically we've cut through the right ventricle, you can see how thin the wall is on the right side. That's because the right ventricle is kind of a wraparound muscle that really is puny compared to the left ventricle, because the left ventricle is what pumps the blood through all of your body, okay? Whereas the right ventricle only goes to the lungs, the pulmonary circuit, low pressure, doesn't take much, and so it's just kind of an add-on, so to speak. Okay? Yeah, so, let me just grab this here. As we're looking at this, there's some other things to keep in mind that you can see here. First of all, you can see this chamber. This is the left chamber, okay? This is the atrium right here. And you see it's a big chamber, and it has some flaps right down in here. And the other side has some flaps in it as well. And its chamber is kind of torn up there, but you can see it up here. See how these muscles are kind of crisscrossed up in the top? Okay? Those are the pectinate muscles, okay? And they're called pectinate because they kind of crisscross, and when they contract, they do a crunch. You know, they just crunch like this to decrease the volume. And what that does is push all the blood down into the ventricles. Okay? And so that crisscross pattern of the pectinate muscles is designed to maximize, evolutionarily, that maximizes that little push. Although, I'll tell you now, most of the blood, 70 to 80% goes in by gravity feed only. It's only the last 20 to 30% which actually the atria contribute when they contract. So somebody who's in atrial fibrillation, although they don't like that because it could spread to the ventricles, which would be really bad, it doesn't, you know, it's not necessarily fatal, at least not immediately, because most of the blood is coming by passive gravity flow. Okay, so the flaps that these go through are different between the left and the right. On the left side, this is cut, so there's actually two flaps, and you can't, I mean, there's partially cut. Here's one flap over here. There's the other half of the first flap, and here's the second flap here. There's only two flaps on the left side, and that's a mitral valve, or bicuspid valve. So there are two cusps, okay? On the right side, there are actually three cusps, and you can see that. There's one here, there's another one here, and here's the third one over here. That's a tricuspid. So you have three cusps on the low pressure side, the right side, so it's a tricuspid valve. And then you have two cusps on the high pressure side, so it's a bicuspid valve. And those valves are called atrioventricular valves because they separate the atria from the ventricles, right? So the blood flows through those ordinarily by gravity flow. They're ordinarily just pushed back against the wall of the ventricles. The blood kind of flows right through those, and then when the ventricles contract, then basically that increases the pressure coming up from below. That closes these flaps on both sides, and basically there's some other muscles in here, which you can see. Let's see, I'll show you on this one. Here's one of them right here. It looks like a little bump there, okay? And here, let me get my thumb on it. Here's one that's been cut on this side here. Here you can see some others with little strands coming from them. The muscles themselves that look like little bumps are called papillary muscles. They look like little papillae that stick up. And from those, there are these little cords that come up. And these cords are made out of tendinous material, basically dense, regular connective tissue. They're not ligaments. They're called cordae tendineae, or tendinous cords. Okay? And their function is to prevent the flaps. They're attached. Oops. They're attached to the bottoms of the AV valves, and when the pressure goes up, the edges of the AV valves come together, and to keep them from pushing all the way through, these little flaps increase their tension because the papillary muscles also contract, and that holds them together so that you don't get eversion of the valves and heart murmurs or efflux of blood back up into the atrium. Okay? Unless there's
So if someone
damage.
has a valve problem, that is probably those little muscles and
Well, that could
tendons.
happen. It can happen because there's problems with the chordae tendineae, or because there's fraying and deterioration of the edges of the AV valves. Both of those can happen. Okay? And these days, they actually can do valve replacements, okay, where they take all these out and remove the connective tissue around there, and then put a little implant in, which has a titanium ring and a little round, a little cage. And so instead of the bump bump, you hear click click. Okay.
You can, I think they can do pigs too.
Do
Yeah,
what?
pig
Pig
valves.
valves.
Oh, yeah, well, xenotransplants. Yeah, okay. And I'm not sure which is better, to be honest with you. You know, it depends on maybe what's in vogue, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the first set of valves. And so if you think about the heart sounds, the first heart sound you hear is the closure of the AV valves, okay? The second sound you hear, because pressure then continues to build up, and then the blood has to be forced out of the ventricles, okay? And so on the left side, it goes through this set of flaps right here. See that? There's one in my finger right there, and there's two others that are cut. And basically, when you look at, if I put my little finger in there, it looks like a little shirt pocket, okay? And actually, if you were to excise these away from the surrounding areas, there'd be 3 of these flaps, and when you cut them out perfectly, then essentially there's a flat edge, and then it's a round area that goes around the actual aorta, in this case. And that looks like a half moon, so they're called semilunar valves, okay? That's because the shape of the flap, when it's removed from the interior of the artery, in this case, looks like a half moon. Where the flat side is the part that comes together, the round side is the part where it's secured around the edge of the artery. So there's 3 of those, and they come together at 120-degree angles. So they close